Okay, welcome to Support for Learners with ADHD. Now, I've got a background in additional learning support, and it's very much around behaviour and what causes behaviour problems and prevents behaviour for learning. That's always been my thing. And so ADHD, well, it'd be no surprise to you that that's one of the first ones that became of interest because some of the behaviours around ADHD look very much like they are driven by naughtiness. But in 2004, there was a large study done, and what was picked up as a result of the study was that children with ADHD often meant a reduction in attainment. But then when more information was given to teachers and to students about advice to manage in the classroom, there was a significant improvement. So your question really is, well, that was 2004, 13 years ago. What have we done since then to roll it out across the teaching and supporting fraternity? And the answer to that is not much. There's nothing embedded in general training for learner support and or teachers. So really it's been up to individuals to make sure that people around them know more about it, because it's not going to go away. It is a prolific condition and we need to know more about it. So let's just scratch the surface today. It is a spectrum condition, which means that some people have it to a greater or lesser degree. And I know that in a mainstream environment, even within that spectrum, there is another spectrum. So what I mean by that is some behaviours as you get older through the school system, they can increase due to other hormonal changes in the body, and it causes some of the behaviours around ADHD to seem more pronounced in their teenage years. But I think teenagers generally have more pronounced behaviours, and so that's just an unhappy coincidence if you have ADHD. However, there are people who have it to a greater or lesser degree, and some may be in a special setting, but the majority of people with ADHD who have no academic difficulties are in a mainstream environment. I've been told many times that it didn't exist in the last century. So people have said to me more often than not, it's a 21st century phenomenon. So maybe we had in the 90s, it might have started to appear in our classrooms. Well, the problem with that is that perhaps when I was at school, and I'm a bit of an old bird, so when I was at school, I probably didn't see much ADHD. I expect that people with ADHD were sent to a school up the road. And in my classroom, if there were behaviour problems, it was more likely to be somebody on the autistic spectrum who had sort of a bit of a poor quality of social engagement, but not really bad behaviour. So the ones with really bad behaviour got kicked out and sent to God knows where, probably Borstal. So that's probably the feeling around it being a new phenomenon, that it's only in recent years that we've had to manage it better. But I've got news for you, because the very first diagnosis, or the written series of behaviours, was in 1902, and it was a Dr. George Still, who was a paediatrician. He was working with 40 or 45 young boys, and what he noticed was that they weren't academically low level, they were quite intelligent, but that they had these behaviours that could not be managed. And so he decided there was a morbid deficit of moral control, which is not a very nice name, I think you'll agree. But that was the first name given to this condition, or this series of behaviours and associated, mental symptoms, okay? So morbid deficit of moral control, 1902, that's the first written series of diagnosis. Then in 1930, after a few more years of work, they decided that young people had minimal brain damage that behaved this way. They were kind of getting to the heart of the matter, which was that it was a neurological condition, and they assumed that there was some damage as opposed to moral control, which is an unfortunate expression. Anyway, in 1960, they decided it was a minimal brain dysfunction, and that's what they called it during those years. Then, in 1968, they decided it was only something that occurred in childhood, and so it was a hyperkinetic reaction of childhood. That was what it was called, or those series of symptoms were called in those years. And then in 1980, a nice catchy title, Attention Deficit Disorder with or Without Hyperactivity. Now that's probably more precise than the one we use now, Attention Deficit Hyperactive Disorder, ADHD, which is in 1987. That was when we coined that term, and we still have it now. But ADD with or without the H is probably more accurate, because there are people that don't have the hyperactivity, which is very much harder to spot the condition if there's not hyperactivity, and this tends to be the girls. So it's poor attention, ADD, attention deficit, poor attention without the hyperactivity, is when you would not be able to stay focused and get onto tasks and daydreaming all the time and going off into your own world, what we might have called Dolly Daydreamer in my day. So that's a little potted history. What is it? There's three parts to it. You don't know what task to attend to, and then when you've chosen one, you can't stay focused long enough to finish it. Not being able to control the urge to speak or act, and then this excess restlessness, and that's physical and mental, so it's in the mind and physically of the body. And what it means is that you might move around a lot, you go from this job to that job, you don't finish a job, you go back to it to try and finish it, and you have to catch up and you have to refocus your thoughts. Sometimes I think of that in a way of if you're extremely tired, or you've got a lot of stress and pressure in your life, if you put the cornflakes in the fridge, or you do weird things and you lose things all the time, imagine if you were living like that most of your waking hours, but in 100 times worse. It's very draining, isn't it, when you constantly lose things, you forget why you walked into a room, etc. Imagine that. It's not very easy to live with ADHD. In fact, some of the people tell me that there's such extreme brain activity going on all of the time that if you were to draw it, it would look a little bit like this. Now, this is with grateful receipt from Twitter, because I see a lot of things like this on Twitter, and they're absolutely brilliant, aren't they? But this person has got a lot going on in their mind. If we were to consider what the characteristics of a professional learner would be, so this is somebody who is going to do well. They have got these attributes. They're able to focus, they can concentrate really well, sit still, organise their time, bring all their things to class, all their equipment if they need it, and they can retain information, good memory skills. That's a snapshot of perhaps one of your better students, those who you think, they're going to go far, they're going to go all the way, they can do these things. And this is like a job description, isn't it, for a learner who's going to do really well. But if you compare that with some of the characteristics of someone with ADHD, you'll see how disadvantaged a person will be. So they have scattered thoughts, they can't think straight. Memory skills are poor. They have a very difficult working memories. They can't retain information long enough for it to go into the short-term memory in order for it to go into the long-term memory. They're restless, so they can't sit still. They need to fidget. They can't pay attention. They can't remember things. They can't plan their time. They forget to bring items to class because they've put them somewhere and just completely forgotten about it. So what we've got is someone who is extremely disadvantaged before they've even walked through the door in the classroom. Most often, these kind of things, these problems here, are punishable offences. In fact, I work often with schools and colleges, and we talk about the behaviour process, your disciplinary procedures, and often it starts with a few of these things where you forget your stuff, you don't turn up for meetings when you're supposed to, you don't hand your work in, or it's always late, or and these are real problems, and so we need to find solutions to them rather than just saying, actually, no, this is not your time, you can't come into my class. I have a problem with that when I hear it. So when it comes to learning, people with ADHD have a plan, and the reality is quite different. And I realise that this might also reflect other people, whether they've got a special educational need, poor literacy, or whatever it might be, or just your regular person in the street. I recognise that this learning can be hard, and it can take a long time for some and much quicker for others. But most definitely, if you have ADHD, you're going to take the long route to success. In 2007, there was a study done led by TJ Spencer, and this is one part of their report on it, that they found pervasive impairments associated with ADHD across the lifespan. And in childhood, there are several things here which start off when you're in primary school. So it could be that you already start to fall behind academic underachievement because of the problems you have with focus and concentration in class. And the need to move and this desire to be sort of an adrenaline junkie, you don't have much sort of awareness of risk. There tends to be a lot of injuries, jumping off tables and bumping into things. And what happens at that very young age is relationships start to crumble. And I remember when my children were small, I nearly said when they were nippers, but you know what I mean. When they were small, we had a friend whose child had ADHD, and when he came to parties with other parents, we used to have these games such as Sleeping Lions, musical statues, and both of which those games, the main object of the game is to stay as still as you can for as long as you can. And the winner is the one that could do it for the longest. So what happens with the child with ADHD is they are immediately out. And then we ask them to go and sit over there on the side and wait until the game's finished. And then we'll play another game, which is also impossible to do. So we set up this low self-esteem driven thing very early on. And when you choose someone to play in your football team, or you want them to work in groups with you in class, but you don't want the kid with ADHD because they don't stay in their place on the football field, or they wander off when the ball comes their way, and in class they can't concentrate and stay focused on the group. Immediately you start to lose these, not friendships because they're okay, but certainly relationships in a professional way, in a learning way, which leads to adolescence where the self-esteem is often much lower than others. And when they're 16 and they get their moped, they're a bit clumsy still, and lots of accidents, and smoking and substance abuse becomes much more rife with people with ADHD, which then leads to adulthood where they perhaps didn't achieve well at school and may therefore not reach their potential in work. So this is from this study. Now, it's an interesting study. I would recommend you dip in and out of it. This is just one part of it, and there is much more information about how they got that summary. But for me, it resonates quite a lot because we can do something about that. In America, they've got lots of statistics. This is the Russell Barkley group, who have figured out that teenagers are absolutely highlighted here as being at risk when they're at secondary school. And if you're at school or at college, if you're a teacher or support staff, just no matter what part of education you're in, you can see that, especially if they're transitioning to college, maybe it's 14 to 19-year-olds, 14 to 18-year-olds, they really have a very poor opinion of themselves, especially when it comes to education. So our job needs to be to switch that, to say, that's what happened to you before, but this is not going to happen to you now. Because being suspended from school suggests that there is some behaviour there that's being punished. But if it's something you can't help doing and you keep constantly being told to stop doing it and you can't, it just raises the anxiety and you might tend to do it even worse. And it's really difficult. I think these statistics will be very similar in the UK, although I can't find anything that's good enough for me to say what they are. The neurology really is to blame. I mean, it is a condition of the mind, as even George Still, well, no, he didn't work that out, but they did work that out in the 30s, that it had started in the brain, that it wasn't deliberate, it was some sort of process in the brain. And it's to do with the poor dopamine, which is a transmitter. It sends signals to other parts of the brain. it affects working memory, it affects processing speed and executive functions, and it affects high-level comprehension. So even if you're quite intelligent, it means that these are affected by the neurology around ADHD, and it means a classroom is not a very desirable place to be. Ultimately then, it means that you would either try to get out of it because it's uncomfortable, it doesn't fit with some of the symptoms and signs of ADHD. And the other thing is that obviously it makes you feel that studying is boring because you can't do it. And if you can't run at 100 miles an hour, then it's going to be boring, isn't it? We need to think about supporting ways around it. So some of the mental symptoms of ADHD, and this is obviously the invisible part, the outward signs are slightly different, but some of the the problems that are going on that you can't actually see are here. So I talked about low self-esteem. The mood swings as you get older, they will be more pronounced during teenage years, but then when you get into adulthood, that will probably balance out a bit better. Learning difficulties, sometimes it's comorbid. You might have learning disabilities such as dyslexia, very comorbid with autism, with mental health issues, but learning difficulties really is about the fact that the symptoms of the condition make it hard for you in class with your low attention span, obsessive thinking, and your poor short-term memory. Some of the behavioural symptoms, which I think you've probably seen, and these apply to a lot of people, but if you've got a child or a student in your class who is always this way, then it's not contrived, because ADHD has not got an on and off switch. Some kids, some students, they are sometimes great, sometimes not, having a bad day, a bit changeable, but if they're always this way, then it's more likely to be a condition than it is to be a behaviour that's contrived, really. So remember that, you see it all the time to a high level. It causes an awful lot of upset in people's families. So the frontal lobe of the brain, which controls those behaviours, matures until 21. And with adults, although you don't grow out of ADHD, the symptoms get better. They are managed better by an older and more mature person. But more adults now are going for diagnosis because they recognise it in themselves, and it's more accessible to get treatment. And it's not always medication, the treatment. It can be cognitive behaviour therapy. In fact, I used to do a lot of that with the students in the college a few years ago. So thinking about medication, I'm sure you've got students that are medicated, but what you need to know that some of them are about focus and concentration and others are about hyperactivity. And medications such as Ritalin and Concerta, they do both, which is why they're the most common, because both is the most common ADHD, that the combined condition. ADD, you would have medication just to improve focus and concentration. And that's mostly girls, so 75% boys, 25% girls. And these drugs are mostly stimulant-based. They say that it acts on the brain the same way as cocaine. It stimulates the production of dopamine, which helps to calm the brain of all those other symptoms. So signs of problems with learning, is that bad behaviour or is this ADHD? And if you look at those, my goodness me, if you wrote a list of all the behaviours which would be not conducive to learning, they're there, aren't they? They're absolutely there on the right-hand side. But is it ADHD or is it bad behaviour? You've got to pick that out. But like I said, if the behaviour's always there and there's no malice there, no anger with it, it could be ADHD if you haven't got a diagnosis. So we need to help with a few things, and here's one. We need to help with organisation. If you have got a very, very, very scattered mind, one of the things you can do is to help to process that by being absolutely rigid with your routines in class, rigid with your support for someone who's not very good at keeping to routines. In other words, remind, repeat, write them down, stay with the process, keep with the routine. To be honest, none of your other students will be disadvantaged if you are very firm with your routines and boundaries, because that helps to build up a memory, a reminder of everything. So we could do that quite easily. We could create checklists, and we could encourage people to put alarms on their phones, and we could remind them to do that. If you've got any of your students that aspire to going to higher education, then they're going to need these skills, because they won't have the right kind of support when they're further on, but you can show them how to do that. So if that's what you do, make sure that you stick with what you normally do, create checklists and reminders for everybody, and not verbal, because the verbal reminders, they just don't work, I'm afraid. So you could say, remember, and talk to them, but unless they write them down and make a note of it somewhere, it's unlikely to be remembered. And here about self-esteem, this is some of the negative stuff that gets pulled around. You know, when they're younger at school, they can't do very well, so that by the time they get out to secondary school or college, they really don't believe they can do stuff. So we can build up their confidence. We can start something. If they've got a piece of work to do, start with something that they can do. And if it's answering questions or writing, answering a question, it's much easier to record a response into a phone or a recorder. The brain is working much faster than the typing and the writing speed. What I would recommend is to record it and write it up on the PC. I think that also is a double whammy for the executive function in the brain. It helps to remind once you've said it and then you've written it up. You know, just writing something doesn't always tell you what you know, especially if you're thinking faster. So that's one way of helping. I mean, we've got a few things here. There are lots and lots of things, but we've got a few things here. Make sure you listen, because sometimes they are saying under their breath. So I hear it all the time. I can't do this. I'm stupid. And what they're saying is, I haven't managed to do this before, and what are you going to do differently, which means I am going to be able to do it this time. And I'm stupid means I've never managed to do this before, so why will I be able to do it now? That's why I can't do this task. And sometimes the irritating behaviour is about work avoidance, and the work avoidance is there because they find it hard to concentrate, to have a thought process. So our job is to listen to that and not see it as a punishable offence. We should see it as something we can improve on. So I quite like these verbal strategies. Let's see how quickly we can get this work done properly. Get them started. What are the first few words you want to write down? Record it into your phone. Tell me now and I'll make notes. Any way you like, get them started. And then when they're doing it, we just keep on reminding them how well they're doing, and give prompts and give clues as to how long they've got left to do and what the next bit should be. When we've done this, then we can do that. You know, keep at it, which is why I think in class you should try and seat your students quite near to you, so that you can do all of that quite easily without having to work your way across the room. So stick with the positives, the verbal things. They're important. Thumbs up when you see things are going well, a bit of a smile when they make eye contact with you. You're saying, actually, we can do better than that. Let's do it. Let's try together. You know, investing your time into this quite early on means you'll get it back, because once you've helped your student to overcome their own self-negative thoughts, you'll get that back later in their continued success. And if you've got someone in class like this that wants to answer all the time and calls out all the time, what's happening here is that they've managed to catch a thought. They've managed to remember something, and it's a cause for success. And unfortunately, what it doesn't look like is that, you know, your rule, which would be, you know, put your hand up or listen when others are speaking, or whatever it might be, is being completely overlooked here. Take your turn. You know, it's very difficult. There's a few things about calling that I quite like doing. I like the silent answering. certainly if your ears are bleeding in class because everyone's calling out. Just voting cards. So these are yes, no, true, false, and multiple choice. Two things are good here. It gives the student something to fiddle with, which is important, and you can ask closed questions, or you can ask a multiple choice. Everyone gets to vote. All of your students can be included. It means participation is required by everyone, and it's so easy to do. So try that, silent answering, or just use a little whiteboard. Write their answers on a board and hold it up, and they're simple to do as well. I get mine from the pound shop, and I know that sometimes you get a bit of pornography written on your whiteboards. It's like a rite of passage, but forget that. Just, don't feel you can't give a whiteboard to someone because you're worried about what they're going to draw. Just get them to rub it off. Don't make a big deal out of it and say, right, you've had your fun, let's get on with some work. Write your thoughts down, and it's a really great way. Your students could doodle and everything with this. So look, what I want to tell you, you might not know this, is that I have this accredited level 2, level 3 ADHD training program, which we run all over the place within schools and colleges as inset, but you can get your accreditation. But we've got it as a home study as well. So if you're serious about helping your students become more successful, then you might want to consider this. And it's in 4 modules. It's a short course qualification at level 2 or level 3. And I think these are the level 2 outcomes. We have 4 main questions, and within each of the questions there's several sections we break down, and these are them. We do it, I think it works out to be about 14 study hours, and it's all by guided webinars and extra videos to watch and things like that, and then you write up into your workbooks. You send your workbook for marking and you get feedback. So it's broken into 4 modules, as you can see there. It's really good, and what it does is it prepares you for a lot of different examples in the classroom that you're probably already dealing with it, and yet you can, it validates the work you're already doing in some cases, and also it will help you to improve upon that completely. I think it's absolutely great for your students, essential for your career if you're in that line of work, sublime improvements for your working day, my goodness me. And if you're talking to parents, you can do so with some kind of authority on ADHD, and your CV will benefit from it. I'm doing this ridiculously massive discount. I love words like that, ridiculously massive discount, because you're here and we're doing ADHD this week. So this home study, it's usually £149 plus VAT, but this week it's £99 including VAT. So if you're serious about upskilling yourself to take some of this information even further, then get in touch with me this week and we will be able to get a home study pack out to you. It's all guided by me, and it's fantastic. So get in touch. So we've got more can-do conversations coming soon. I'm talking to a number of different people about some of the subjects we can look at, and it's very, very exciting because people are so willing to give their time to share with you guys, so that you can, improve your practice without waiting for your school or college to do some training for you. So thank you very much for coming today. Remember, if you've got any questions or emails or anything like that, you can send them across. I'm looking at the questions box now and I can't see any that have been asked today. Oh, yes, I have. Oh, we go. Okay. Well, I don't know why they didn't appear. I apologise, everyone that's asked a question. What have we got here? Ooh, bear with me a second. Okay, working education with a student who shows some behaviour similar to ADHD and tics. He's got no diagnosis, 18. Okay. Is there any service that could come into education to offer this assessment? That's interesting, because I happen to know there are lots of support groups around the country who will do that, and there are places for young people to go and get some support themselves. What I find is parents are often offered support. The older they get, the older the child gets, is really difficult, and they probably don't want to go the parent route. They need more support themselves. So what I'll do, let me just see if I've made sure I've got who's asked that question. Yes, I have. I've got your email. So what I'll do is I will send you a fuller response with some links to some support groups. They're normally free, and it's possible for the person with ADHD to attend them as well. So it's not just for families and parents, especially if it's an 18-year-old. So leave that with me, okay? Another question here. How do I dial in? I don't know. Do you believe it's related to diet? Well, you know what? It doesn't. Diet does not cause ADHD. The truth is that there are genetic reasons for ADHD. It's not diet, but it does make it worse. And in some cases, that's because people with ADHD tend to have more food intolerances than people without ADHD. So it's not that it causes the condition, but that it makes it worse. Okay, does that make sense? So it's related to diet in as much as it can make it worse. There was a study done with things such as additives and preservatives and crop spraying and things like that. And what they discovered was that the people who lived in those sort of farmland areas were just more susceptible to having a reaction to additives and things like that. It wasn't that it caused the ADHD, it was the other way around. They already had the condition, but some of the symptoms were increased because of it. Does that make sense? So no, it's related, but not in a way that you might imagine. We do read a lot about that, don't we? Here we go. Would it be possible to have a copy of the slides? Well, I'll tell you what, I will send a little PDF copy over to you so that you can have a reminder. How would you sanction an ADHD learner in a mainstream classroom? Sanction them? Well, you've got to differentiate behaviour management for someone with ADHD, because if it's not behaviour that's driven by naughtiness or by a desire to upset you, then it's really got to be about preventative measures. So you find out what it is that's driven the behaviour, and then they would have their own targets and support. And there's lots of things you can do that. First of all, like with calling out, you would recognise that they're going to have a problem with not calling out. So you must adjust your reaction to that. I know I was called to reserve a class. There was a girl, she called out probably 75 or 80 times. And I said to her before we sat in there, everyone thinks you call out a lot, and I know you don't think you call out a lot. Just let me do a tally and then we'll know. And she went, oh yeah, okay. You know, she wasn't upset about it. And that's when we realised that she had all these callings out. Oh, I don't think that was calling out. Well, it was, you know, it was, and you've got to be honest about it. So what we did was we said, you've got to reduce the calling out. We gave her calling out cards. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't an overnight success, but what we did was we recognised that we had to reduce it. So we allowed it to happen, and the target was reduced each time. She had a number of, and we gave the calling out cards to everyone. We said, you know, you can call out, you've got to give me your card, and when all your cards are gone, you can't call out anymore. If you call out, you've got to answer the next 3 questions and stuff like that, just to make light of it. And she was very creative because she was buying other people's calling out cards and everything. It's hilarious. But, you know, it wasn't hilarious for the teacher and for the others in the class, because it did disrupt learning. But she never became perfect, but we gave her a blurt book so she could write down what she was thinking instead of calling out. We gave her a whiteboard. She was allowed to doodle. She reduced her calling out to probably 10, 15 times in a lesson, which is a huge success. So rather than think about the sanctions, think about how you can help the student to improve upon it. Okay, that's my advice, and it'll help everyone, and nobody will be disadvantaged. I hope that helps. Right, we've run out of time, everyone. Oh, okay, yes, I see your message about the home study pack. I will email you. Oh, several people for home study pack. Good, good, good. I will be back in touch with you and with all the questions that you've got here, and I hope to see you very soon. Thanks so much for coming today. Bye for now.